You're in a most interesting position, having grown up in the Soviet Union, grown up in the Soviet Union system, having been loyal to the Soviet Union, but you're one of the pioneer builders of what's a very new system in a very old country, which is Russia today. Could you speak to that issue and talk about what the most profound differences between the two countries are, and what, if anything, what are the things that need to be preserved from the old Soviet to do to grow it beyond where it was? Because it is, after all, a very young system of government you have here now. So my question, I guess, is how do you think about that, and how do you separate those issues out?
First of all, you're absolutely right. Russia is an ancient country with great, ancient, deep traditions and a great moral foundation. And this foundation is the love towards the motherland. It's patriotism. Patriotism in its best sense. By the way, to a great extent, this characterizes the American nation as well. What do we absolutely need to get rid of? We need to get rid of that period in our Soviet history when we tried to lead the world socialist and communist revolution and become world leaders in this movement, when we tried to dictate to other countries how they should live. I think not only the Soviet Union made this mistake, but it was obvious in the Soviet Union. Undoubtedly, we need to get rid of this. I think that whatever is possible, in general, I will paint a big picture here, we should keep. And what needs to be developed? We need to develop respect for our history, regardless of all its problems, and love for the fatherland. We need to protect moral values to the greatest extent and consolidate our society on this basis. I consider this an absolute priority.
Where do you see Russia's place 30 to 50 years from now? During the Cold War, of course, there were two superpowers. At the end of the Cold War, there was one. The French called America a hyperpower. With the rise of China, all the stakes seem to be changing. So where would you like to see Russia in the geopolitical order 30 to 50 years from now?
You see, we somehow can't get away from the Cold War period and the superpower way of thinking. I just said that the Soviet Union wanted to be the leader of a worldwide communist revolution, and we did not need this. This was a big mistake, and we don't want to repeat their mistakes in the future. We don't want to order anyone around. We don't want to be a superpower which domineers and gets involved in decisions. But we want to have enough power to defend ourselves, to defend our interests, and to build good enough relations with our neighbors and with our partners, so that these partners could also have an interest in the development and strengthening of the Russian Federation. This is not an easy task, but it is possible only through consolidation of Russian society itself and increasing its economic opportunities. These will be our tasks in the short and long terms. And if we carry out these tasks, then Russia's rightful place in the world is guaranteed. I think the United States already understands, and in the future will understand even more, that only a strong Russia can respond to the core interests of the United States.
Could you speak for a moment about NATO? You could view NATO as a living organism, or you could look at it as a remnant of the very thing you talked about earlier, which is the organization of the world into blocks. And what its purpose is today, and for that matter, if Russia were invited to join it, would you join it?
I wouldn't say that NATO is the stinking corpse of the Cold War, but it is undoubtedly something that we have inherited from the past. There is no point in pretending otherwise. First, NATO was created, let's remember the history, and then in answer to this, the Warsaw Pact was created. Two military, political, and opposing blocs were created. If we are talking about the fact that we should introduce not only a new structure, but new principles into international life, if we are talking about the fact that we need to search for mutual understanding compromises based on respect of each other's wishes within a multipolar world, then such organizations are not a universal instrument for solving today's problems. How can NATO combat terrorism? Did NATO stop the terrorists on the 11th of September from launching a strike against the United States and destroying hundreds of thousands of Americans? Where was your NATO to block this threat, to liquidate it, to protect America from it? Where was it? It wasn't there. It's not there. And it cannot be there because such threats can only be combated by increasing trust towards one another and by working on an everyday basis with those players who are capable of blocking such threats. One of those players, one of those partners is, without a doubt, Russia. Russia does not intend to join military political blocs in order to limit its sovereignty, because participation in such a bloc undoubtedly does limit sovereignty. But we would like to have good relations not only with the United States, but with all countries, including the countries in NATO and with the organization itself. On the whole, NATO, of course, can be an instrument of international politics, which can help resolve certain problems. But I think that within the organization, there is a lot that also needs to change. It's no longer possible to force someone into a military regime or drive them into a corner, because today the situation is different. If before the United States shouldered a greater burden and left itself open even to danger in protecting the Western world from the threat of the Soviet Union, then today there is no such threat, because there is no Soviet Union. And therefore, within the organization, it is necessary to build relations according to different principles. As far as fighting crime and the issue of drugs, which cause real harm in our countries, with terrorism, with organized crime, with poverty, last but not least, which is one of the sources of terrorism. For this we need to work together in a much wider scale than just one military political organization.
Mr. President, you mentioned organized crime. One of the perceptions that Americans have about Russia is that corruption is endemic here in many ways, and that it has been something of an obstacle to you. How do you govern and handle that, and how do you get control of it?
We are dealing with this issue poorly. Our control in this area is weak. But I have to tell you, and this is not new to you either, that in a transitional economy and also in conditions of rebuilding political system, of course it's harder to solve such issues because we don't see proper response of the civil society. I have to admit there is no civil society control system in place, as well as control over state institutions. We now have greater possibilities from the standpoint of material resources, buying things from certain people and companies. But the income level in the state service sphere does not correspond with the wide range of decisions that the workers make. Soon, on the one hand, you have your salary and the importance of the decisions that they make on the other hand, and these do not correspond. Social mentality still does not comprehend the fact that work of state workers who manage multi-billion projects has to be rewarded accordingly, so that they are not tempted. So all of this together, as well as giving more opportunities to media, all this together is one of the tasks that we are planning to do. But I'm absolutely convinced that as we strengthen the political system, civil society, improve market relations, including making federal decisions when managing the economy, these problems we will also solve, and more effectively than today.
You mentioned civil society, and I'm going to switch speeds on you now with this question. One of the issues that is being discussed in our presidential election is the role of faith in government, faith in the public square. One of the old stereotypes that Americans have about Russia, and certainly Russia as the USSR, that it was a godless country. You yourself have talked about your own faith. I'd love to ask you, what role does faith play in your own leadership, and what role should faith play in government and in the public sphere?
In answering administrative questions and formulation of administrative tasks, we should always, of course, first and foremost be governed by good sense. But this good sense should be based on moral principles. And there is no, and can be no morals and morality in today's world which are separate from religious principles. And that is all I want to say. I could say more, but I'm going to stop here because I do not want to assert my point of view to those people who have a different opinion. There are these people, and they have the right to their own opinions.
Could you say just a little more? Do you believe in a supreme God?
Do you?
I think so.
I'll tell you later.
Yes.
You know, there are some things that I feel one should not, in my position, exhibit for public viewing, because then it becomes like self-advertising or political striptease, neither which I believe are acceptable.